The bell beneath Stillwater Ridge rang only after midnight, when the moon was hidden and decent people had locked their doors. No church stood on the mountain, and no bell tower rose above the black pines. Yet the sound came rolling through the valley, as clear as iron struck in an empty graveyard. One slow note. Then another. Then a third that seemed to pass through walls, blankets, and sleeping hearts. On the first night, Sable Fenwick heard it. She sat up in a strange bed with a grieving child beside her and knew, without knowing how, that something under the mountain wanted everyone above it to be afraid. By winter, the people of Stillwater Ridge would blame that fear on her. Before spring, the man who had asked her to come would break her heart in front of the same neighbors who had laughed when she arrived. But on that first night, Sable only listened. She placed one broad hand over little Nella Vale's trembling fingers and whispered, "Whatever that is, it does not get to decide who we are." The child stared at her with wide grey eyes. Far below them, hidden in the dark, the bell rang again. 3 weeks earlier, Sable had reached the ridge in the back of a mud-splashed stagecoach with one brown trunk, a sewing basket, and a letter folded so many times that its creases had gone white. The letter had been written by Eamon Vale, though Sable later learned that the storekeeper had helped him choose the words. It said he was a widower of 38 years, steady in work and habits, living on a small mountain, holding with his 8-year-old daughter. It said he sought a practical wife, who was kind with children, unafraid of hard seasons, and willing to build a quiet life, far from crowded streets. Sable had read those lines each night during the long journey west. She had not dreamed of romance. At 34, she had learned to be careful with dreams. She had only allowed herself to imagine a clean table, a child laughing in the next room, and a man who might value the strength in her hands more than the shape of her body. The coach stopped in front of Harlan Pike's general store just before noon. Stillwater Ridge was less a town than a gathering of stubborn buildings pressed between a steep mountain and a cold river. A few false front shops faced a road made soft by spring rain. Smoke leaned from stone chimneys. Horses stood tied beneath an awning, their hides dark with mist. Men came out of the feed store when they heard the coach, and women paused near the post office with baskets on their arms. News arrived slowly in the mountains, and anything new was worth looking at. Sable stepped down carefully. She was tall as well as heavy, broad through the shoulders and hips, with a full, soft face that made strangers assume she was timid. Her dark auburn hair had loosened during the ride, and damp curls clung to her cheeks. She wore her best blue dress, though the cloth was wrinkled from travel, and she held herself straight while the driver lowered her trunk. Her hazel eyes moved over the gathered faces until they found a lean man in a weathered coat, standing beside a pale little girl. Eamon Vale looked almost exactly as Sable had imagined him. He had dark hair touched by early grey, a strong nose, and the tired posture of someone who had carried grief for too long. Nella stood half behind him, gripping the seam of his coat. The child had her father's grey eyes and a braid that looked as if it had been tied in a hurry. Sable's heart lifted at the sight of them. She took one step forward. "Mr. Vale?" she asked. Eamon looked at her, then past her into the empty coach. His expression changed so quickly that she might have missed it if she had not spent a lifetime watching faces. Hope became confusion. Confusion became disappointment. "You're Miss Fenwick." "I am." She tried to smile. "Sable Fenwick. We wrote for nearly 4 months." A young man near the hitching rail gave a low whistle. 4 months and nobody thought to mention the size of the package. 2 men laughed. A woman covered her mouth, but not soon enough to hide her smile. Eamon's face went red. He glanced toward them, then back at Sable. "Your letters did not say—" He stopped, but the unfinished words were worse than finished ones. Sable looked at him steadily. "They did not say what?" The young man answered for him. "That one woman would need a whole wagon seat." More laughter passed through the small crowd. Nella flinched. Sable felt the heat rise from her collar to her hairline, but she did not lower her eyes. She had been called names in schoolyards, dress shops, boarding houses, and even the church where her mother once took her. She knew how people could turn another person's body into public property. She also knew that if she cried now, someone would tell the story for years, as if her tears had been entertainment. Eamon cleared his throat. I expected someone different. So did I, Sable said softly. That quiet reply took some of the pleasure from the crowd. Eamon stared at her. Before he could speak, a neatly dressed woman stepped out from the post office. She was narrow and straight, with pale hair pinned so tightly that it seemed to pull all kindness from her mouth. I am Yisabet Morrow, she said. I teach the children here. I suppose the advertisement could have been more exact, but we must all accept the trials sent to us. Sable had met women like her before. They placed cruelty inside gentle words and expected gratitude for it. Travel has tired me, Miss Morrow. Could you tell me where I might find a room? Harlan Pike, a round man with flour on his sleeves, pointed across the road. Mrs. Bell keeps 2 upstairs, if she has not rented them. Thank you. Sable bent to take the handle of her trunk. Eamon reached for it out of habit. I can carry that. You have already carried enough for one meeting, she said. She pulled the trunk through the mud herself. It was heavy, and the wheels were small, but anger gave her strength. Behind her, the young man muttered another joke. This time, Eamon told him to stop. It was too late to matter. Mrs. Bell's room had a sloping ceiling and a washstand with a crack down the basin. Sable paid for one night, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the bed without removing her hat. For several minutes, she felt nothing. Then her hands began to shake. She took the folded letter from her pocket and read the line she knew by heart. I do not care for foolish appearances, Miss Fenwick. A person's true measure is shown by what they do when life grows difficult. The first tear fell on the word measure. Sable pressed the paper to her chest and wept so quietly that no one in the hall would hear. She cried for the miles she had traveled, for the small apartment she had given up, and for every foolish little hope she had tucked between shirts in her trunk. Most of all, she cried because Eamon had sounded lonely in his letters, and she had believed lonely people might be kinder to one another. When darkness came, she washed her face and went downstairs for supper. Mrs. Bell served stew at a long table to travelers and unmarried miners. Conversation thinned when Sable entered. She took a place near the kitchen door and ate without looking up. Halfway through the meal, the front door opened and Nella Vale slipped inside alone. Her thin coat was buttoned wrong. Rain shone in her braid. Papa says you are leaving tomorrow, Nella said. Every face at the table turned toward them. Sable set down her spoon. That is likely. The girl studied her with grave attention. Was it because he was rude? One of the miners coughed into his hand. Sable almost smiled. Partly. He was not rude before Mama died. Nella's voice remained matter-of-fact, but her lower lip trembled. Now he forgets things. He burns the bread. He does not know how to braid. Sometimes he looks at me and gets sad, because I look like her. Sable's anger loosened, though it did not disappear. You came all this way in the rain to tell me that? Nella shook her head. I came because I lost Mama's blue ribbon. I thought it might be on the road. Papa thinks I am in bed. Sable stood so quickly that her chair scraped the floor. How far is your home? Up the north track, near the birches. Sable took her shawl from the peg. She did not ask why no adult at the table had moved. She only looked at Mrs. Bell and said, Please, send someone for Mr. Vale. Then she led Nella back into the rain. They found the ribbon caught on a thorn bush near the edge of the settlement, soaked and dark but whole. Sable untangled it, while Nella held the lantern. The child hugged the wet strip of cloth against her chest. A moment later, Eamon came running down the road without a hat, his face white with fear. Nella! He dropped to his knees and caught her by the shoulders. What were you thinking? I searched the cabin and the barn. I thought... His voice broke. He pulled her close, then looked up at Sable. Rain ran down his forehead. You found her. She found me. I am sorry. For losing her or for shaming me? Eamon closed his eyes. Both. Sable handed him the lantern. One apology does not repair either thing. I know. He stood, still holding Nella. Come to the cabin tonight. The road will be worse by morning, and she is soaked. You can have the back room. I will sleep by the stove. Sable should have refused. Pride told her to return to Mrs. Bell's, leave at sunrise, and never think of Stillwater Ridge again. Then Nella reached for her hand. Her fingers were cold, and her eyes carried the same question Sable had carried since childhood. Am I too much trouble to keep? One night, Sable said. The Vale cabin stood on a rise above the north track, surrounded by birches and tall grass. It had once been handsome. Now one shutter hung crooked, weeds covered the garden, and an empty chair sat beneath the porch roof facing the mountain. Inside, dust lay along the shelves. A pile of mending filled a basket near the hearth. A cracked plate had been left on the table beside a dried crust of bread. The place did not look poor. It looked abandoned by people who still lived there. Eamon built up the fire, while Sable helped Nella change into a nightdress. The child's room held small signs of a mother's hand, painted flowers around the window, a quilt made from bright scraps, and a row of wooden birds hanging above the bed. Sable dried the blue ribbon near the lamp, then combed Nella's damp hair. Mama used to sing while she did this, Nella said. I do not sing well. Neither did she. Sable laughed before she could stop herself. Nella smiled, and the sound of it seemed to wake something in the room. After the child slept, Sable found Eamon at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. He had made coffee, but neither cup had been touched. Her mother went into the river last spring, he said without looking up. A footbridge gave way. I was 10 paces behind her and could not reach her. Ever since, Nella wanders when she is upset. I put bells on the doors for a while, but she hated them. Sable sat opposite him. Grief is not a locked room, Mr. Vale. You cannot keep a child inside it and call her safe. He lifted his eyes. You are right. I know. For the first time, the corner of his mouth moved. The almost smile vanished quickly. I behaved badly today. There is no honest excuse. I saw the men looking, and I cared more about their judgment than yours. That is an explanation, not an apology. Then I am sorry, Miss Fenwick. I was vain and cowardly. You deserved better. She looked down at her hands. A true apology did not erase pain, but it had a different sound from a convenient one. Thank you. Will you still leave? I have not decided. Eamon nodded. Whatever you decide, I will pay your return fare. Sable should have found comfort in that. Instead, she heard the careful distance in his voice. He felt responsible for her, not drawn to her. It hurt, because some small, stubborn part of her had hoped one evening might change everything. Morning brought pale sunlight, and a view that made Sable forget her sadness for a moment. The cabin faced a long valley filled with silver mist. Pines climbed the mountain in dark rows, and above them rose a bare ridge streaked with old snow. A stream curved through the meadow below, bright as a loose ribbon. Nella found Sable on the porch and placed a cup of weak tea in her hands. Papa says you can stay a week if you want, she said. Does he? I told him to say it. That sounds more likely. Nella leaned against the porch post. You could see if you hate us. Sable looked at the neglected garden, the loose shutter, and the lonely child beside her. She thought of the boarding house room she had left behind in Ohio, already rented to someone else. She thought of the last letter from her older sister, full of news about a life in which Sable was always a visitor. A week was not a promise. It was only time enough to think. Very well, she said. 1 week. That week began with work. Sable scrubbed the table, aired the bedding, and opened windows that had been shut through winter. She never asked Eamon's permission to clean, and he was wise enough not to object. She repaired the torn kitchen curtains using cloth from an old flour sack. She found onions sleeping beneath weeds in the garden and set Nella to clearing around them. She patched 2 shirts, organized the pantry, and showed Eamon how to add baking soda to water to loosen the burned crust from a pot. You know a great many things, he said one evening. Most women do. Men simply call it knowing a great many things when they finally notice. Nella laughed into her milk. Eamon looked at Sable, surprised, then laughed too. It was a low, rusty sound, as if it had not been used in a long time. At the end of the week, Sable stayed for another. No one named the arrangement. Eamon moved his few clothes from the back room and built himself a narrow bed in the loft. Sable helped with the cabin, and Nella, while he worked cutting timber and repairing fences for nearby farms. In return, she had a roof, food, and time to decide what her future might be. Some evenings they sat together on the porch. Eamon spoke about weather, tools, and the habits of deer. Sable spoke about the dress shop where she had worked, and the river town where she grew up. They avoided discussing marriage. The silence around it became a fourth person at the table. The people of Stillwater Ridge did not let Sable forget her arrival. At the store, conversations stopped when she entered. The young man who had joked at the coach, Toby Rusk, bowed too deeply and asked whether she had come to buy all the flour. Sable met his grin with a calm look. "No, Mr. Rusk. I thought I might leave one sack so your manners have something to grow in." Harlan Pike laughed so hard he dropped a scoop. Toby's friends remembered the reply longer than they remembered his joke. Yisabet Morrow was harder to answer because her insults wore clean gloves. She taught Nella in the one-room schoolhouse and seemed to believe sorrow should make children quiet and easy. When Sable walked Nella to school for the first time, Yisabet looked her over and said, "Mountain paths can be demanding. Perhaps the walk will prove useful to you." "It already has," Sable replied. "It brought me to the schoolhouse, so I could ask why Nella has not received her reading book." Yisabet's smile tightened. "She has been distracted. She has been grieving. Those are not the same thing." Nella received her book that morning. As April softened into May, the cabin began to feel less like a place Sable was visiting. Fresh curtains moved in the windows. Herbs grew in boxes beneath the sill. Nella stopped waking every night and began bringing home sums marked with careful praise. Eamon repaired the loose shutter and carved a proper shelf for Sable's sewing things. Once, when he thought she was outside, Sable saw him lift a jar of blackberry jam she had made and smile at it as if it were treasure. The change in him was slower. He still spoke too little, and sometimes grief pulled him far away while he sat only a few feet from her. But he began asking Sable's opinion before making decisions. He saved the best part of the morning coffee for her. When she climbed a ladder to mend the porch roof, he stood below with both hands ready, not because he thought her weak, but because he feared she might fall. Sable noticed these things and tried not to build hope from them. One warm evening, she found Eamon sharpening a scythe near the barn. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows. Nella was chasing moths in the grass, and sunset had turned the mountain copper. "The east field could take potatoes," Sable said, "if we clear the stones." "We?" She looked at him. "Do you object?" "No." He ran his thumb carefully along the back of the blade. "I only wondered how long you mean to stay." The direct question frightened her more than she expected. "Do you want me to go?" "No," he answered too quickly, then looked toward Nella. "She is better with you here." Sable waited for something more. Nothing came. "Then I will stay through planting." That night, after they had gone to bed, the bell rang beneath the mountain. Sable woke to Nella climbing under her blanket. The sound was deep and slow, too large to come from any handbell. Eamon appeared in the doorway carrying a lamp. His face was alert, but not surprised. "You have heard it before," Sable said. "Once, when I was a boy. The old miners called it the hollow bell. They said it rang when the mountain was angry." "Mountains do not grow angry. Men do. Sometimes it is hard to tell the difference in the dark." They listened until the final note faded. Nella clung to Sable. Outside, every dog in the valley began to bark. The next morning, 3 sheep were missing from the Barlow farm. No blood, wool, or tracks were found near the broken fence. 2 nights later, the bell rang again, and a milk cow vanished from a pasture below the schoolhouse. Fear traveled faster than facts. At Harlan's store, people said wolves had come down from the high country. Others said thieves were hiding in the forest. Old Mr. Creel claimed the abandoned Vale Quill mine had woken after 30 years and was calling for new lives. Sable did not believe in angry mountains, but she believed in patterns. The bell rang after moonless nights. The missing animals came from fields near the North Stream. In the mud beyond the Barlow fence, she found 2 long marks running side by side, too straight for an animal and too narrow for wagon wheels. When she showed Eamon, he crouched and touched the edge of one groove. "A drag sled," he said. "The kind used to pull stone. Who still owns one? The mine company, perhaps. Orson Quill stores old equipment near the lower shaft." Orson Quill arrived in town the following Saturday, as if his name had summoned him. He was a tall, silver-haired man, with a red waistcoat and a polished walking stick. His father had opened the largest mine under Stillwater Ridge, then closed it after a collapse killed 6 men. Orson now owned the empty shafts, several timber lots, and a grand house beyond the river. He liked to say that he had brought work to the valley, though most of his workers came only when he needed something cleared or guarded. At a meeting outside the store, Orson offered sympathy to those who had lost animals. "These are uncertain times," he said. "An old place can become dangerous when no one maintains it. I have warned for years that the North holdings are difficult to protect." "You offered to buy those holdings last fall," Eamon said. Orson smiled. "And the offer remains. I would never pressure a neighbor, but land is a burden when fear takes hold. Anyone wishing to sell may come to me." His gaze passed over the crowd and paused on Sable. "You must be Miss Fenwick. Stillwater has spoken of little else." "Then Stillwater needs more useful conversation," she said. A few people hid smiles. Orson did not. Eamon wrote for a wife and gained a housekeeper with a sharp tongue. Life does enjoy its surprises. Sable felt Eamon stiffen beside her. Before he could answer, she said, "Sharp things have their use, Mr. Quill. They cut through rope, lies, and other tangles." Orson's eyes cooled. "So they do." 3 days later, the spring above the Vale cabin turned cloudy. Sable filled a bucket at dawn and noticed an oily color moving across the surface. A bitter smell rose from it. She stopped Nella before the child drank and carried the bucket to Eamon. He dipped 2 fingers into the water, rubbed them together, and swore under his breath. "Mine wash. From the old shafts. It could be, but the mine is downhill from the spring." Sable looked toward the mountain. "Water runs downhill. Men can carry anything uphill." They walked to the spring and followed the narrow channel into the trees. 50 yards above it, behind a screen of cut pine branches, they found a shallow trench filled with gray-black water. The trench came down from an old service trail leading toward the mine. Boot prints marked the soft earth, but recent rain had blurred their shape. Eamon knelt beside the trench. "Someone dug this. Someone wants the spring ruined." He stood. "Or someone opened an old pocket by mistake." Mistakes do not usually hide themselves with pine branches. Eamon did not answer. His reluctance troubled Sable. It was not that he disagreed. He seemed afraid of agreeing. That evening she asked why. Nella was asleep, and rain tapped softly on the roof. Eamon sat near the stove mending a harness. "Orson owns half the work in this valley," he said. "People owe him money. Harlan's store survives because Quill Freight uses the road. Yisabet's school receives coal from his yard. If I accuse him and cannot prove it, I do not stand alone in the trouble. Nella does too. And if he is poisoning our water, then we find proof. Proof does not walk to the door and knock." Eamon set down the harness. "What are you asking me to do? Come with me to the mine." "No." The word landed hard. Sable crossed her arms. "You think I am wrong. I think the lower shafts are unstable. My father worked there. He watched 2 men die in a fall. I will not take you near it." There was fear in his voice, but also care. Sable softened. "Then take me around it, not inside." He considered this. At daylight, they left before Nella woke, asking Mrs. Bell to stay with her. Mist lay thick between the trees. Eamon carried a rifle in case of animals, and Sable carried food, rope, and a notebook. The old mine road climbed behind the ridge, crossing several dry gullies. Near the first bend, they found more paired grooves in the mud. Farther on, a survey marker had been pulled from the ground and thrown into brush. Sable cleaned the brass cap with her sleeve. "Why move this? It marks the boundary between Vale land and Quill land." Eamon pointed across the slope. "Without it, a buyer might believe the mine road belongs to Orson. Or a hearing officer might." They found 2 more markers, both damaged. Sable drew their locations in her notebook. At the top of the road, the forest opened around the abandoned mine yard. A collapsed loading shed leaned beside heaps of pale stone. Rusted rails disappeared into a dark opening, braced with old timber. No smoke rose, and no people were visible. Yet fresh horse droppings lay near the equipment shed. Eamon touched Sable's sleeve. "We have seen enough." Then a metallic thud echoed from underground. Sable looked at him. That was not the bell. No, it was nearer. Another thud came, followed by the scrape of something heavy. Eamon drew her behind the loading shed. A side door opened near the lower shaft, and 2 men came out pushing an empty ore cart. One was Toby Rusk. The other was a thick-set stranger with a brown beard. They rolled the cart into the equipment shed and shut the door. Sable whispered, "Mr. Rusk has found new employment." Eamon's jaw tightened. Orson hired him last month to guard timber. That cart did not come from a timber lot. They waited until the men disappeared along a side path, then returned to the cabin. Eamon promised to speak with Sheriff Denby, who visited the ridge every other Tuesday. Sable wanted to examine the shed, but Eamon made her promise not to go alone. She gave the promise honestly. At that moment, she still believed he would stand beside her. The next bell came 2 nights later. This time Sable was awake before it rang. She had heard wheels on the distant road and gone to the window. A hooded lantern moved through the trees below the spring. Then the deep note rolled through the cabin. Nella cried out from her room. Sable went to her, while Eamon ran outside. By the time he reached the trees, the lantern was gone. At dawn, they found fresh black water in the trench, and a strange mark cut into a birch. A circle crossed by 3 lines. The same mark appeared on the Barlow fence and the schoolhouse well. Yisabet announced that it was an old sign of bad fortune. She said her grandmother had seen it before a fever swept through a mining camp. By noon, people were drawing curtains when Sable passed. By evening, someone had left a bundle of dead weeds on the Vale porch. "Why me?" Sable asked Eamon, as she carried the bundle to the stove. He looked ashamed. "Because the bell began after you arrived. Spring began after I arrived too. Will they blame me for the mud? Fear does not need sense. No, it only needs permission." Nella stood in the doorway, clutching her reading book. "Miss Morrow says I should not bring you to the school anymore." Sable crouched until they were eye to eye. "What do you say?" "I say she is mean," in a quiet voice. Eamon turned away, but Sable saw him hide a smile. "That is a fair description," Sable said. "You may also say I have work to do here. You do not need to fight grown people's foolishness for me." "But who will?" Sable glanced at Eamon. "Grown people, I hope." Sheriff Denby arrived the following Tuesday. He was tired, practical, and more concerned about rustlers than mountain bells. He examined the polluted spring, the damaged survey markers, and Sable's notebook. Then he met Orson Quill at Harlan's store. Orson produced papers showing that he had hired Toby and the bearded man to inspect old shafts for safety. He said any fresh tracks were easily explained. As for the water, he blamed natural seepage. The survey markers, he suggested, might have been damaged years ago. "Miss Fenwick has an active imagination," Orson said. "Understandable in a stranger, eager to make herself necessary." Sable sat across from him at Harlan's back table. "The livestock were dragged toward your road. Then perhaps thieves used the road. Your men moved ore carts before dawn. My men inspect my property. Why does a safety inspection require hidden trenches and false markings?" Orson leaned back. "You have not proved either belongs to me." Sheriff Denby rubbed his mustache. "He is right about that, Miss Fenwick. Suspicion is not evidence." Sable looked at Eamon. He stood near the window, silent. She understood the sheriff's caution, but Eamon's silence felt different. It felt like the space he had left around her on the day she arrived. After the meeting, Orson offered to buy the Vale holding for half its value. The spring may remain spoiled, he told Eamon. You have a daughter to consider. And a woman with an active imagination, Sable added. Orson smiled. A temporary concern, I assume. Eamon refused the offer, but not loudly enough to satisfy her. The weeks that followed were filled with small acts of fear. Families began keeping children indoors. Men carried rifles to check fences. Someone painted the crossed circle mark on Mrs. Bell's door, then spread a rumor that Sable had done it to frighten people. At school, 2 children called Nella the Bell Witch's daughter. Nella struck one with her slate. Yisabet punished only Nella. Sable went to the schoolhouse before lessons ended. You know why she did it, she told Yisabet. Violence is never acceptable. Then why is cruelty acceptable when spoken softly? Yisabet folded her hands. This began when you came. You unsettle people. Because I ask questions? Because you do not know your place. The words were plain at last. Sable felt a strange relief. My place is wherever I stand with honest purpose. Your confidence is impressive. Yisabet's gaze moved over Sable's body. Though confidence can become hunger, some people take more space in a community than they have earned. Sable had heard sharper insults, but this one found an old wound. She breathed once before answering. You teach children, Miss Morrow. Every small cruelty you excuse becomes a tool in their hands. Be careful what you give them. She took Nella home. On the way, the child slipped her hand into Sable's. I am sorry I hit Caleb, Nella said. So am I. Are you sorry he called you that? No, I am sad someone taught him to. That night, Eamon found Sable sewing near the fire. Yisabet says you threatened her. Sable's needle stopped. Did you believe her? No, but people are angry. At me. At everything. That is a comfortable way to avoid choosing a side. Eamon paced to the window. You speak as if courage is simple. It is not simple. It is a choice made while afraid. And if that choice costs me this land, if it puts Nella in danger, she is already in danger. Her water is poisoned. Her schoolmates repeat the hatred of adults. A man is trying to drive you from your home. He turned. You do not know that. I know enough to keep looking. Then look, but do not ask me to risk my daughter on a guess. The words silenced the room. Sable set the sewing in her lap. You think I would risk her? Eamon's anger faded at once. That is not what I meant. It is what you said. She went to the back room and closed the door. He did not follow. Before dawn, the bell rang 7 times. At sunrise, the Barlow barn burned. No person was hurt, but 2 horses died from smoke before the doors could be opened. A crossed circle had been painted on the outer wall. Fear became fury. By noon, a crowd filled the meeting room above Harlan's store. Yisabet stood before them, with one hand on a Bible. She claimed she had seen Sable near the schoolhouse well after dark. Toby Rusk said he had watched Sable carve the strange mark into a tree. Mrs. Bell said she doubted both stories, but her voice was drowned out. Orson did not accuse Sable directly. He was cleverer than that. No one wishes to condemn an outsider without cause, he said. Yet we must protect our homes. Perhaps Miss Fenwick should leave the ridge until these troubles pass. And if the troubles follow your land purchases? Sable asked. Murmurs moved through the room. Orson spread his hands. You see? She turns neighbor against neighbor. Sable looked toward Eamon. He stood beside Nella near the back wall. His face was pale and worn. She waited for him to step forward. He did not. Eamon, she said. Every head turned toward him. Nella gripped his hand. Eamon swallowed. I do not believe Sable burned the barn. It was not enough, and they both knew it. But, Sable asked, but I think she should stop searching the mine. Just for now, until Denby can return with men. The sheriff will not return for 2 weeks. Then wait 2 weeks. Orson's satisfaction was almost invisible. Sable saw it anyway. You said a person's true measure is shown by what they do when life grows difficult. she told Eamon. His eyes filled with pain. Sable, please. I believed you. She left the room alone. Someone opened the door for her but would not meet her eyes. At the cabin, Sable packed her trunk. She folded each dress with slow care because her hands wanted to tremble. The blue dress she had worn on arrival lay at the bottom. When she touched it, she remembered the crowd's laughter, Eamon's disappointment, and the wet road under the little trunk wheels. She had stayed because she thought loneliness had taught him gentleness. Now she wondered if loneliness only taught some people to guard what little comfort they had. Nella slipped into the room. Are you leaving? Sable did not turn. I may, because Papa was a coward. Your father is afraid. That is the same thing. Not always. Sable faced her. Coward is a heavy word. Once you put it on someone, it can hide every better thing they might become. Nella began to cry. Everybody leaves. Sable knelt and opened her arms. The child came into them with such force that they both rocked backward. Listen to me, Sable whispered. Your mother's leaving was not a choice. If I go, it will not be because you are difficult to love. You are not difficult to love. Then stay. Sable closed her eyes. Through the wall she could hear Eamon moving in the kitchen, each footstep uncertain. I have spent my whole life staying in places where people asked me to become smaller, she said. Quieter, softer, less noticeable, less hungry, less myself. I cannot teach you courage if I agree to disappear. Nella pulled back and wiped her face. Then do not disappear. Find the truth. The simple words settled in Sable's heart. Leaving and disappearing were not the same. Neither were staying and surrendering. She looked at the half-packed trunk and understood that she did not need Eamon's permission to finish what she had begun. She unpacked her notebook. For the next 4 days, Sable moved carefully. She did not return to the mine. She began with records no one considered dangerous. Harlan let her examine old freight books stored beneath the shop counter. Mrs. Bell introduced her to Abel Wynne, a retired surveyor who lived in a small house near the river. Abel's hands shook, but his memory remained sharp. When Sable showed him her drawings of the damaged markers, he pulled a rolled map from a tin case. Quill tried to buy that North Road 20 years ago, Abel said. County refused because it gives 3 farms access to the spring. These marks prove the road is shared. Can you testify to that? Abel looked toward his window. Orson buys my coal. He buys everyone's silence a little piece at a time. The old man studied her. You are not from here. No. Then why care what happens? Sable thought of Nella's hand in hers, the herbs beneath the cabin window, and Eamon's rusty laugh. Because I am here now. Abel gave her the map. The freight books revealed that Orson had ordered 6 barrels of lamp oil, 200 feet of iron cable, blasting powder, and a replacement clapper for an industrial warning bell. The deliveries had come quietly over 3 months. Harlan remembered Toby moving them after dark. Why did you not ask questions? Sable said. Harlan looked ashamed. Orson owes this store $80. I thought if his mine reopened he might pay. He does not owe you $80, Mr. Pike. He owns $80 of your courage. Harlan winced. That is fair. Will you show these books at a hearing? He hesitated, then nodded. Mrs. Bell brought another piece. On the night of the barn fire, Toby had eaten supper at her table until nearly 10. The Barlow family swore the fire began before 10:30. Toby could not have seen Sable carving a tree across the valley at the same time. Mrs. Bell also remembered Yisabet asking strange questions about Sable's evening habits 2 days before the meeting. She wanted to know when you walked and where, Mrs. Bell said. I told her you had better things to do than haunt wells. Sable was less interested in the insult than in the timing. Someone had prepared the accusations before the fire. The hardest proof came from the missing livestock. Sable followed rumors beyond the river and found a teamster named Jory Bell in a camp near Redwash. He admitted that Toby had paid him to transport animals at night. Jory believed they were being taken for unpaid debts. When he learned they had been stolen to frighten families, his face changed. I never harmed them, he said. Quill sold them at the rail yard, even the Barlow sheep. Will you say that before a county officer? Jory rubbed both hands over his face. Quill will ruin me. He already made you part of something that could send you to jail. The teamster looked up sharply. Truth may cost you work, Sable said. Silence may cost you your name. Jory agreed to testify if Sheriff Denby promised fair treatment. Each evening, Sable returned to the Vale cabin. She and Eamon spoke only about meals and Nella. He saw the map and freight notes accumulating on the table, but he did not ask to help. His silence no longer felt like uncertainty. It felt like a wall he did not know how to cross. On the fifth night, Sable woke to a light beneath the back door. Smoke curled through the kitchen. She shouted Eamon's name, grabbed the water bucket, and found burning rags pressed against the porch boards. Eamon ran from the loft in his trousers and beat out the flames with a blanket. Together, they carried the smoking rags into the yard. Nella stood in the doorway, white with fear. Sable knelt beside the remains. The cloth smelled of lamp oil. Beneath it lay a small piece of paper marked with the crossed circle. Eamon stared at the burned edge of the porch. Something in his face finally broke open. You were right, Sable stood. I did not want to be. I know, his voice shook. I thought if I stayed quiet, he would leave us alone. Men like Orson hear quiet as permission. Eamon looked toward Nella, then back at Sable. Tell me what you need. Part of her wanted to make him suffer longer. A larger part was too tired for punishment. I need the records inside the equipment shed. If Orson kept purchase books, wage lists, or land plans, they will connect the rest. Then we go together. You told me the shafts were unsafe. They are. That is why you are not going without me. They left Nella with Mrs. Bell before sunrise. A storm was moving in from the west, turning the mountain sky green-gray. Sable and Eamon climbed by the old road, staying beneath the trees. At the mine yard, the equipment shed was locked. Eamon used a narrow iron bar to lift the latch from its rotted frame. Inside, they found the drag sled, coils of cable, 3 empty oil barrels, and the hides of 2 missing sheep. Sable swallowed her anger and kept looking. A desk stood behind a row of broken tools. Its drawer held wage notes signed by Toby, a list of holdings Orson planned to purchase, and a county petition claiming the shared spring had become naturally unsafe. The petition had been dated a month before the water turned bad. He planned every piece, Eamon said. Sable found a second page showing proposed rail access through the North Holdings. A mining company from Denver had offered Orson a fortune if he could control the whole road and reopen the lower shaft. This is why, she said, not the ore under his land. The road through yours. A deep metal note shook dust from the rafters. The bell. It was close now, ringing somewhere inside the lower shaft. Eamon took Sable's hand, and they moved behind the desk. Through a crack in the wall, they saw Toby and the bearded man enter the yard. Both wore rain capes. Toby held the rope leading underground. Quill wants 3 rings tonight, the bearded man said. Then we foul the Barlow well and mark the church steps. No church here, Toby replied. Then the school. Sable felt Eamon's hand tighten around hers. Toby walked toward the shed. They had seconds. Eamon pointed to a rear window half covered by boards. He pushed Sable through first, then passed her the records. As he climbed after her, the door opened. Hey! Toby shouted. Sable and Eamon ran into the trees. Rain began in hard, cold drops. The bearded man followed, but the steep ground slowed him. Toby knew the path better. He came close enough to seize the back of Eamon's coat. Eamon turned and knocked his hand away. Both men slipped in the mud. Toby caught a root. Eamon slid toward the edge of a washout where the earth had fallen 20 feet into a rocky gully. Sable dropped the papers inside her coat and threw herself flat. She caught Eamon's wrist with both hands. His boots struck loose soil. For one terrible moment, his full weight pulled against her shoulders. Pain burned through her arms. Let go, he gasped. You will fall. I have been told all my life I am too heavy, she said through clenched teeth. Today it is useful. She dug her knees into the mud and pulled. Toby, still clinging to the root, stared at them. Then he reached out. caught Eamon's other arm, and helped drag him back from the edge. The bearded man appeared above the path. "What are you doing? Get them!" Toby looked at Eamon, then at Sable. Shame crossed his young face. "Run," he said. They ran. By the time they reached Abel Wynn's house, the storm had washed mud to their knees. Abel sent his grandson for Sheriff Denby. Sable spread the damp records near the stove and copied every page before the ink could blur. Eamon watched her work. Once he opened his mouth to speak, but she shook her head. "Not yet," she said. "First we finish." Sheriff Denby arrived that night with 2 deputies. After reading the petition and wage notes, he sent one man to guard the mine and another to bring Orson to a county hearing. Orson refused to come willingly. He claimed the papers had been stolen and altered. Denby answered that a judge could decide. The hearing was held 2 days later in the largest building on the ridge, a timber hall used for dances, elections, and winter meetings. Rain drummed on the roof. Nearly every person in the valley came. Some wanted justice. Some wanted a spectacle. Many still hoped the truth would require nothing from them. Sable sat at a long table, with the records stacked in front of her. She wore the blue dress from her arrival. It had been cleaned and pressed, but one sleeve bore a faint stain from the mine road. Eamon sat behind her with Nella. He had asked to sit beside her. Sable had said no. Orson stood across the room in a dark coat, calm as a man attending someone else's trouble. Isabet sat near him. Toby had not been found. County Magistrate Rowan opened the hearing. "This is not a trial," he said. "It is an inquiry into property damage, theft, water pollution, and possible fraud concerning the North Holdings. We will hear facts. We will not hear superstition." Sable rose first. Her heart beat so hard she felt it in her throat. The room seemed larger than it had from the doorway. She saw faces that had laughed at her, faces that had looked away, and faces beginning to regret both. She placed her notebook on the table. "When I arrived in Stillwater Ridge," she began, "many people decided what I was before I spoke 10 words. That habit has cost this valley more than my feelings. You judged my body, then my purpose, then my honesty. Mr. Quill understood that if I found his scheme, you would rather blame the stranger than question the man who held your debts. He did not create every cruelty in this room. He simply learned how to use it." No one moved. She showed the map and called Abel Wynn. The old surveyor testified that the damaged markers defined a shared road. He identified each location Sable had recorded and explained that without the markers, Orson could claim private control of the mine route. Harlan Pike brought the freight books. His voice trembled as he read the orders for cable, oil, blasting powder, and the industrial bell clapper. "I should have asked why," he said. "I did not because I needed his business." Orson's lawyer asked whether buying a bell was a crime. "No," Sable said. "Using it to frighten families while stealing their livestock is." Jory Bell entered through the rear door with Sheriff Denby. He described the nighttime animal transports and named Toby as the man who paid him. He gave the location of the rail buyer who had purchased the stolen stock. Denby confirmed that the buyer had sent a written statement. Mrs. Bell then proved Toby could not have seen Sable carve any mark on the night he claimed. She also testified that Isabet had asked about Sable's movements before the barn fire. Magistrate Rowan turned to the schoolmistress. "Miss Morrow, do you wish to explain?" Isabet stood. Her face was bloodless. "I was afraid. Mr. Quill said Miss Fenwick meant to close the school by proving the well unsafe. He said the valley would empty. He asked me only to encourage her departure, by giving false testimony. I never expected a fire." Sable looked at her. "You expected a crowd to hate me. You simply hoped they would be careful with it." Isabet lowered her eyes. Orson rose. "This is theater. A bitter woman has gathered frightened people and taught them the story she once told. The papers from my shed were stolen. Any one of them could have been changed." "The petition was filed with the county clerk," Sable said. Magistrate Rowan brought the original. Rowan held up the page. It matched Orson's copy exactly, including the date before the spring was polluted. For the first time, Orson lost his calm. An expected danger can be reported before it occurs. Then why list offers for the affected farms before the danger? Sable asked. Why plan a rail line across land you did not own? Why pay men to ring a bell from the old shaft? You have no witness to that. The hall door opened. Toby Rusk stood there, wet from the rain. A bruise darkened one cheek. The bearded man had struck him after he let Sable and Eamon escape. Toby walked down the center aisle without looking at anyone. I rang it, he said. Mr. Quill showed us the old warning bell in a rock chamber. Cable ran from it to the side shaft. He paid us $5 for each night. We dragged the animals, we dug the trench. Lem set the barn fire because Barlow would not sell. Orson's lawyer told him to be silent. Toby shook his head. I was silent plenty. He looked at Sable. I also lied about her. From the first day, I made sport of her because other men laughed. Then I kept doing worse things because Mr. Quill paid me, and because stopping would mean admitting what I was. His apology was clumsy, but honest. Sable nodded once. Forgiveness could wait. Truth had finally arrived. Sheriff Denby placed a hand on Orson's arm. Orson pulled away. You think this changes anything? He shouted at the room. Every man here took my credit. Every woman here warmed herself with my coal. You wanted me powerful until power frightened you. He is right about one thing, Sable said. The room turned toward her. He did not build this fear alone. He found it here. He found people willing to trade a neighbor's dignity for safety. He found laughter, waiting for a target. He found silence where courage should have been. If you send him away and learn nothing, another man will use the same tools. No one applauded. Sable was glad. Applause would have made the moment easy. Instead, the people of Stillwater Ridge sat with the weight of what they had done. Magistrate Rowan suspended Orson's mining claim pending a full county case. He ordered the North Road and Spring placed under shared protection. Sheriff Denby arrested Orson on charges tied to theft, property damage, and fraud. Lem, the bearded man, was caught at the rail station the next morning. Toby agreed to testify and accepted that he would face punishment too. When the hearing ended, townspeople gathered near Sable. Mrs. Bell hugged her. Harlan offered a stammering apology. Abel Wynne squeezed her hand. Others tried to explain that they had only been scared. Sable listened without making their shame easier. Fear explained their actions. It did not erase them. Yisabet approached last. I am sorry, she said. I was unkind before any of this began. Yes, you were. I do not know how to repair it. Sable looked toward the children waiting by the door. Begin by teaching them that difference is not danger. Then live as if you believe it. Yisabet nodded. Whether she would change remained her own work. Outside, the rain had stopped. Clouds opened above the ridge, revealing a strip of bright evening sky. Nella ran to Sable and wrapped both arms around her waist. Eamon waited several steps away. His eyes were red. Come home, Nella said. Sable touched her braid. Go with Mrs. Bell for a moment. I need to speak with your father. Nella looked suspiciously at Eamon, then obeyed. He and Sable stood beside the muddy road where they had first met. The same hitching rail leaned in front of Harlan's store. The sight of it made the past weeks feel both very long and very close. I failed you, Eamon said. Not only at the meeting, I failed you the day you stepped from the coach. I saw a brave woman who had crossed half the country to meet me, and I worried about fools laughing. Then when those same fools turned cruel, I worried again about standing apart from them. Sable said nothing. He drew a slow breath. I told myself I was protecting Nella. The truth is that you protected her. You repaired the home I had let fall apart. You gave her back laughter. You saw danger while I kept calling it uncertainty. You did not merely save my mountain. You restored my courage. Courage cannot be borrowed forever, Sable said. You will need to keep choosing it. I know. And I am not a reward waiting at the end of your apology. Pain moved across his face. I know that too. He looked toward the mountain. When Mara died, I decided loving someone was another way to fail them. Then you came, and I found a different excuse. I told myself I did not feel what I felt, because you were not what I expected. But every day you became the person I looked for when I entered a room. Every evening felt warmer if you were in it. I loved you before I had enough honesty to call it love. Sable's eyes filled, but she held his gaze. You hurt me. I did. I cannot promise that one speech repairs it. I am not asking for a promise. He took a small folded paper from his pocket. It was his old advertisement, the one that had brought her west. He tore it once, then again. I am not seeking a wife anymore. I am asking Sable Fenwick whether I may spend however long it takes, becoming a man she can trust. She looked at the pieces in his palm. A laugh and a sob rose together in her chest. That is a very long way to ask if I am coming home. Are you? Sable glanced at Nella, who was pretending not to watch from Mrs. Bell's porch. She looked up at the mountain, dark but no longer watchful. Then she looked back at Eamon. Yes, she said, but I am not staying because this town has decided I am useful. I am not staying because you finally found kinder words. Why then? Because I choose the life we might build. Because Nella should not lose another person who loves her. Because there is a garden waiting for potatoes. And because I want to see whether your courage survives the next difficult day. Eamon's smile came slowly. So do I. They walked home together with Nella between them. No one in the town laughed. Sable did not need their silence, but she noticed it. The valley took time to heal. Men from the county sealed the dangerous shafts and removed the hidden bell cable. They found the old iron bell in a chamber beneath the ridge, green with age, and suspended from a timber frame. Orson had used blasting powder in empty tunnels to make each note roll farther through the mountain. The bell itself was taken down and brought to town as evidence. For weeks it lay beside the sheriff's shed, ordinary in daylight. The spring cleared after the trench was filled, and its stones replaced. Harlan organized a fund for the Barlow barn. He gave the first money, though it left his store short for a month. Isabet removed Nella's punishment and asked Sable to speak to the older children about evidence, rumor, and courage. Sable agreed only after Isabet promised the lesson would not turn her into a saint. I am a woman who paid attention, Sable told the class. You can do the same, Toby returned after serving a short county sentence. Some people wanted him driven from the ridge. Sable did not defend what he had done, but she reminded them that a community could not claim to believe in change while refusing anyone the chance to prove it. Toby worked without pay to rebuild the Barlow barn. He never joked about Sable again. More importantly, he began stopping others when they tried. Eamon kept his word in quiet ways. When neighbors praised Sable as if she had become acceptable only by saving their land, he corrected them. She was worthy before we were wise enough to see it, he said. When decisions were made about the farm, he asked her before he spoke. When he was afraid, he admitted it instead of hiding behind silence. He did not become perfect. Sable did not ask him to. Trust returned like warmth to cold soil, slowly and only where tended. Summer came bright and green. Potatoes filled the east field. Nella learned to swim in a safe bend of the river, while Eamon watched with fear and pride. Sable sewed dresses for half the women who had once mocked hers, but she charged fairly and accepted no false sweetness. Mrs. Bell became her closest friend. Abel Wynne visited on Sundays and told stories so long that coffee had to be warmed twice. One evening in late August, Eamon brought Sable to the porch after supper. The mountain shone purple in the last light. Nella stood behind him, trying and failing to hide a bunch of wildflowers. Eamon held no advertisement and made no grand speech. Sable, he said, this is your home whether you marry me or not, but if you still want a husband, I would be honored to become yours. Sable looked at Nella. Was that the speech you helped him practice? Nella shook her head. Mine had more about your eyes. Eamon sighed. It did. Sable laughed, then let the tender silence settle. Yes, she said, you may become mine. They married under the birches in early autumn. Mrs. Bell baked the cake. Harlan brought lanterns. Abel stood beside Eamon, and Nella scattered yellow leaves ahead of Sable because mountain flowers had already faded. No one gave Sable away. She walked to Eamon by herself, broad, steady, and beautiful in a dark green dress she had made with her own hands. Years later, travelers still asked about the bell beneath Stillwater Ridge. Some had heard stories of a curse broken by a strange woman from the east. Others said a mountain bride had fought ghosts and won. Nella, grown older and braver, always corrected them. There were no ghosts, she would say. Only frightened people, one greedy man, and a woman who refused to become smaller for either. The old bell was eventually melted down. Part of its iron became a school bell that rang in daylight, calling children to lessons instead of families to fear. Another part became a small dinner bell for the Vale porch. Nella liked to ring it when supper was ready, though Sable often claimed the whole valley could hear her. On quiet nights, Sable still woke sometimes and listened. The mountain made many sounds. Wind moved through the pines. Ice cracked in winter. Water turned stones beneath the earth. None of it frightened her now. Beside her, Eamon slept with one hand open on the blanket. Across the hall, Nella dreamed in the room with painted flowers and wooden birds. Sable had not been made smaller by love. That was how she knew it was love. It did not ask her to fold herself into another person's comfort. It gave her room to stand, speak, laugh, grieve, and be fully seen. The town's acceptance had come late and would never be the measure of her worth. Her worth had crossed the mountains with her in a mud-splashed coach. It had stood beside a lonely road while strangers laughed. It had entered a neglected cabin and made warmth without asking permission. Sometimes Eamon woke and found her watching moonlight on the ridge. "What are you listening for?" he would ask. Sable would smile and settle beside him. "Nothing," she said. "That is the beautiful part.